Okay, welcome back everyone to Jface Games. What we're doing is we're talking about building an RPG, and we're coming up with different ideas. Some of them we're taking from other board games, like core board games, and we're just lifting them and changing them enough to make them more thematic for our RPG system, because there's a lot of great mechanics out there. And that brings me to the idea today that I want to overhaul the game I've been creating and take a little facelift of it and think a little differently with it. I think that what I love most about board games what I love about certain board games is when a board game's mechanic matches its theme beautifully so that the mechanic is lending to the thematic experience. That's amazing. So it's so important that the mechanic feels, when you're doing the mechanic, it feels like that experience. I think that a small game we talked about earlier, which was bottom of the ninth, and the fact that it was a pitching batting duel and there was that guessing mechanic, and that when you're playing it, even though it's a small short game, when you're playing it, it feels like there's that I'm trying to figure them out, right? The mechanic lent to the experience. Well, that's one of the problems I have with RPGs is that usually there's one core mechanic that's then distributed throughout everything you do in the game, right? If you're a D20 system, you're using that D20 for everything you do. If you're a, the Cortex Prime system, which I love the Cortex Prime system, but if you're doing it, you're using that dice pool system for everything you're doing, right? Which can be wonderful because it can mean that there's ease of access for certain people because they only have to learn one mechanic. But at the same time, I think we can do better, right? I think that people are clever enough, and when you look at the actual characters, that core mechanic might be pretty simple, but then you get your character, and your character is all kinds of robust and interesting, that people have a lot more flexibility to learn than I think sometimes we give them credit. So what I want to do is I want to make 5 different mechanics, right? I know that seems like a lot, but bear with me. The 5 different mechanics I want to have in a system is that there is a player combat mechanic, right? So when you are in combat, there is a specific system that you're using for you as a player to attack and engage and work together, right? It needs to be fast, it needs to be punchy. I think all the stuff that we've talked about before, it needs to have surprises to it, it needs to have pressure luck, it needs to be thematic, tactical, etc. Teamwork oriented, everything. Then I want a monster combat mechanic. I want the monster combat mechanic to do the same thing, but it doesn't have to be the same as the player. How many times have we seen those scenarios where you're trying to have, as a DM, 10 monsters because you want to have that feeling of, oh, we're overwhelmed, but then you're sitting there and D20, roll 10 times, and if you've got those monsters batched together, it goes player, then 10 monsters, and then player. And sometimes that doesn't feel great. Sometimes it drops the drama, or sometimes it drops the attention span of the players, because now they're going to check out for a moment. So why not have a monster mechanic that is completely different than the player mechanic? Why not? Now let's get out of combat. Downtime mechanic. I love downtime. I love the idea of crafting, downtime, ways my players can get better outside of the actual fighting. So why not have a specific downtime mechanic? This might be heavy with charts, tables, etc. Who cares? Have fun with it, because this might be something you're doing with your players individually in between sessions, right? This might be some of that, let's keep the conversation going, let's have some fun, or your player, this is what happened, etc. So I think having downtime mechanics would be really cool. Something their player can chew on while they're away from the game. The next one is macro level, which means world map / politics. I would like to have a different system for that, because I think that that's a different mindset, right? That's a different mindset. That's a different concept altogether. We talked about it way back with Blades in the Dark, how Blades in the Dark had the faction system, which was really cool. There's another like World War II RPG of some sort that has supposed to be a really robust faction system. I haven't checked it out yet. So I want that top level faction, that top level world management, political aspect, but I want it to be quick and thematic, right? And then micro level would be social interaction / in essence the RP part, right? I think that should have a punchy, quick mechanic as well, but I think it should also feel like it and be robust. Now, I'm not trying to extrapolate role-playing completely. Obviously, every one of these levels. Role-playing is a part of that. I just think that maybe this is like the idea of skill checks in 4th edition, like there's skill challenges. You know, how can you make those role-playing experiences, like skill challenges, how can you add mechanics to a social interaction in a way, but not all of a sudden make it feel like, all right, let's suspension of, you know, belief and let's go into role-playing mechanics, which is unfortunately what often happened with the skill challenges with my groups. So this is where I want to go with these mechanics. I think there's a lot of fun to be had here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Maybe you split these up differently, but I think it's time. I think it's time to start making an RPG system where there's not one mechanic that just goes throughout everything, that you have maybe different mindsets. Because let's be honest, what's nice about this is that certain players might not like these 3 aspects and they just want this, so that's all they do. Or certain players just want these aspects. They just want to do social interactions and macro politics. Great, use those mechanics. And those mechanics should feel and reward those players for wanting to play that type of game. It shouldn't feel like a combat interaction if that's not what they're into. So that's where we're going. Let's see what the hell happens. I'm going to quickly talk in the next video about possible attack mechanic for player combat that I was thinking of. See you next time.